This week's episode of Screen Talk is brought to you by Netflix, presenting Beasts of No Nation from writer-director Cary Fukunaga, starring Abraham Atta and Idris Elba. Nominated by the Screen Actors Guild for Outstanding Cast, and Idris Elba now nominated by the Screen Actors Guild and Golden Globes for Best Supporting Actor. When civil war tears his family apart, a young West African boy is forced to transform into a child soldier and join a unit of mercenary fighters led by the charismatic Commandant. Entertainment Weekly declares Beasts of No Nation one of the year's most unforgettable films. Rolling Stone raves, Idris Elba gives a powerhouse performance, and Oscar for Best Supporting Actor should have his name on it. The Washington Post proclaims Cary Fukunaga's created film as haunting as Apocalypse Now. For your consideration, now streaming on Netflix. Welcome to Screen Talk, Indiewire's weekly podcast. I'm Eric Cohn, the deputy editor and chief film critic, joined as always by Ann Thompson in Los Angeles. And while we have many movies to talk about at this time of the year, there's one that seems to command the attention of the entire damn planet. So I guess we have to devote our podcast to talking about it too. Welcome to the post-Star Wars world, where we've actually seen The Force Awakens and have no plans on spoiling it for people, because apparently you get exiled from humanity if you do things like that in these parts. But
I think both of our reviews were pretty much spoiler free.
You try, because it's such a delicate line to walk. There's some big twists in the movie and all that, but there's so many people who just don't want to know anything. And credit to Disney just from a marketing standpoint for creating such a mystery around this thing, that the moment I sat down on Tuesday night and watched it at the New York screening, which was actually a lot later than most people around the country in the media space saw it, but it did feel like there was this mystique around it, like the whole world was sort of complicit in protecting this thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Well, I think what's really great about it is the introduction of, it's obviously a transitional film where we're updating, J.J. Abrams very adept at giving audiences in a culture that he understands, today's culture, but multi-generational, what they want in a Star Wars movie. He really did figure that out, and he really did deliver it, and I commend him for that. But my favorite part of the movie, even beyond the affection I may hold for General Leia or Han Solo or Chewbacca or whatever, little glimpses of R2-D2 and C-3PO, is the new stuff. And I think that's what Abrams actually did best with.
Well, there's two ways to look at that. One is it's a brilliant coup, because it's creating a form of mass market entertainment that isn't happening at the expense of quality. A lot of times we talk about big blockbuster tentpoles as not needing to be good in order to be successful. And the other way of looking at it is, well, how cool would it be for somebody to do something kind of edgy and different and take some risks? This movie doesn't feel like it's taking risks, but it does feel like it's a lot better than it had to be commercially successful. And that's actually really exciting in certain ways.
Well, I would argue that they're fueling a long-term. Bob Iger paid $4 billion for Lucasfilm and the right to make Star Wars movies, and he wants to make his money back.
Yeah, well, they're already in the black, basically, not just with ticket pre-sales, but with all the ancillaries on this thing, right?
No, they're fine. They're not, but not $4 billion. They still have to catch up with, but they've got a slew of spin-offs and sequels all planned out with different people like Rian Johnson and Gareth Edwards, directing, right. and I'm excited to see what some of these more idiosyncratic directors do with it, because you do have to be able to put a little bit of your personality into a movie, just the way Cuarón's version of Harry Potter was the best of all the Harry Potters. And so I think Abrams has done a brilliant job of setting up the whole thing. I love the young leads. I love John Boyega and Daisy Ridley, and and BB-8. I love them all. So, and Oscar Isaac has potential. He didn't have that much to do in this one as the sort of, great flyer pilot guy for the Resistance. But we'll see. We'll see what they do with them in the future.
As exciting blockbusters go, it's no Mad Max, but it's a movie that does have a certain sort of vibrancy to it that is often lost in kind of the rush to make a movie for the general public. I mean,
well, that's one of the reasons why I really like the section where you have this sort of first intro where they're bringing you up to speed on what's going on with the dark side versus the Resistance, and then you have the a whole, so that
careful
whole
and
aspect,
spoilers.
That whole aspect is being, laid out. And then you have this great section on this desert planet Jakku, where we get to meet this young flyer who is a young woman. And she's really good. And maybe she's got the Force in her. Maybe she's the one who's going to be wielding the lightsaber. That's fantastic. And you have this black guy in a stormtrooper outfit who's defecting. It's wonderful.
Well, I mean, everything you're describing is basically in many ways kind of a reboot because of the kinds of ways that it's presenting fresh characters in a dynamic that's already familiar to people to some degree.
For sure.
And when people really
each one is part of an archetype that's already been established.
I mean, it's
only she's Luke Skywalker. You know what I'm saying?
Now you're spoiling it for everybody. It's just over. We lost like 1,000 Screen Talk listeners. But that's okay. They'll come back because once they see the movie, people are going to talk about it totally different ways. I mean, what I like about this from a cultural standpoint is that it's such a delicate dance. It has to be good. It has to deal with a universe people take very seriously. Generations have grown up and raised children around these plot lines. And yet at the same time, it has to introduce people to this world. And
I loved it that my daughter Nora, who's 26 years old, and I did do my parental duty when she was growing up. She did see these movies, but she went and watched all three of the pivotal, the first three movies, episodes 4, 5, and 6, which are considered the good ones. She looked at those again, and I was proud of her for that.
Well, I think there are a lot of different ways you can look at what's happening here. One is to look at the movie. The other is to look, like you were saying before, at what's going to come next. We now live in another era for Star Wars. It's going to unfurl over the next several weeks and then the next few years. And I think that next chapter is going to be what is worth scrutinizing because a filmmaker like Gareth Edwards, who made that little indie sci-fi monsters and then made Godzilla in a very different kind of way, giving him room to play around in the Star Wars universe could, in theory, allow for a different kind of blockbuster formula to start to take shape. Him and Rian Johnson and whoever else is in there. Colin Trevorrow is going to do one. He already had great success with Jurassic World. But, I mean, I think that the idea
I'd like to see some women directors get in there. Ava DuVernay, it's your turn.
Yeah, right.
She was hanging with Ryan Coogler and Colin Trevorrow, getting her picture taken at the Star Wars premiere, which I have to confess really was a great deal of fun on Monday night, where they took over all of Hollywood Boulevard. It was really a hoot.
But at the same time, I almost wonder if we live in a world where Star Wars has the same kind of resonance that it did when it first became a big deal. I mean, I feel like it's informed so much by where these things are coming from that there could be an expiration date and almost a fatigue for this universe if we're inundated with these movies, even if they end up being good for a while.
If I were to say that there was one aspect of this story that was less than inspiring for me, it really was the presentation of the other side, as a kind of Nazi-like,
the dark side,
fascistic.
Yeah.
No, what's the name of they're called
the Resistance group.
No, it's the Resistance versus the First Order. That's what it is.
Right,
the First Order. So the First Order is headed by Donald Gleason, probably the most thankless role of all the ones that were well cast, and I think Adam Driver comes out better and has more to do, really.
The bad guys are a little underdeveloped. I mean, the thread of just a bigger Death Star. I mean, I don't know. We've kind of been
That's
there
this
before.
part of it that's the part of it that really didn't work for me.
But all
That
they had to
was
do was set in
very
motion some kind
familiar.
of threat. I mean, it's a
Yeah,
MacGuffin, basically.
yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, that it doesn't bother me in theory, but what I think it speaks to is how long before all of these kind of plot lines reach an expiration date. I mean, isn't that what happened or seems to be happening with the Marvel Universe? I mean, Avengers 2 was not nearly as exciting as the first Avengers movie. It felt like we'd been
No.
there and it was a mess.
Well, it still was somewhat satisfying because we like the characters so much. And I would say that's what they did right here. And it's Michael Arndt, who's the one who sort of went in and refigured out how to pull everything together. And then he was rewritten by but enough of him is in there so that he got a Writers Guild, credit. And then you have J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan, of course, the
Right.
godfather of the Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So they're all involved in focusing on the characters, which is what J.J. Abrams did with Star Trek. That's why Star Trek worked, the reboot, was that we knew those people and he got them right. And he does the same thing here.
Right. It's just so clearly designed to satisfy those sort of things, and
He pushes some buttons. He pushes some expected
there are
buttons.
things that people are going to talk about and theories that will unfurl, and everyone can mess around with that. But we live in a different kind of world where people consume stories in different kinds of ways. I mean, when you get to the point where there's going to be Netflix series set in the Star Wars universe, and the conversation reaches a certain point where it's so much bigger than the individual movies, and it's what I think people are going to be talking about with Force Awakens is how it's setting the stage for all of that stuff. I mean, it's just
And they may be, but they're also going to be talking about the box office records that Disney is clearly aiming at breaking. So will it do 200 million on the opening weekend, which is an unusual weekend to open a big Christmas blockbuster? It's about a week early. And is it going to demolish all the records that come before over the Christmas holiday, which is a Christmas, it's a season, it's a box office season. So
what
does
does it
beat
have to hit to do that?
Titanic and if you do adjusted, we just did a whole story on this, boys and girls. So if you want to know the nuts and bolts and the details of all the numbers that have to be matched and why it has to be done over this period of time, the biggest December opener for 3 days with adjusted gross is The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring with 110 million. Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, 100 million. And then you have the first Hobbit, which was actually ahead of the debut of Avatar because there weren't, and then Titanic didn't have that many theaters back then because it's like the ninth pre-Christmas weekend opener or something. So it really, let me see it's going to easily break all those records.
It's like the movies that are selling out, the screenings that are selling out have to be sold out. I mean, it's just, everything is just going to be completely booked. In order for
Tom Brueggemann figures that The Force Awakens will be over 300 million by December 27th, easily. Just doing the math.
Which is
it could get to 500 million by January 3rd.
So that's more than double its budget, unless you take into account P&A on some level. But it's still not enough for this to be the success that they need to be. It's
so if it wants to beat Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, it has to beat 390, and if it wants to beat Avatar, that's 369. And then Titanic did most of its business after Christmas into the new year, so it doesn't matter.
Well, they're not going to have a problem with drop off. I mean, people are going to come back to this thing.
He says there will be some drop off, but it won't be. It's inevitable. But it will. But every day during the Christmas break is like a Saturday. So that's why it's such a big deal.
I mean, we've been anticipating a really busy holiday movie schedule for a while now. Question I have is, I mean, this movie is opening in advance of some of those other, real Christmas Day releases, the Tarantino movie, the Joy, things like that. But could it just steamroll all of that? I mean, is it just sort of like forget about it? You look at Tarantino going off on Disney, about booting the Hateful Eight.
This is a very good example of what goes on during this period because if this is all, I'm getting all of this from Mr. Brueggemann. If
Smart
you
guy.
look at, he knows his stuff. He used to be a booker. That's
former
why
exhibitor.
he actually was an exhibitor. So he knows this stuff. If you look at the summer, every theater, every weekend, you have new big movies opening, but it's over a period of time. It's May to August. If you look at Christmas, every studio is opening a big movie, and so are some of the Oscar contenders from smaller places. And you have all of them competing for space during this intense period of time. And it's about a week. And it's not so that's why you have Tarantino versus Star Wars for the Cinerama Dome. He really wanted the Cinerama Dome. He thought he had the Cinerama Dome. That's why he's so upset, because it's the most prestigious theater that he has. A lot of the 70 millimeter houses are small. And not first tier.
The police boycott thing with Tarantino felt like it got a little out of control, but this is one area where it actually is kind of neat to see him lose it, because he's really fighting for, he wants this movie that he designed for such a particular audiovisual setup to be put in this one place. And
right.
Man, Star Wars is just stepping on his toes.
You can't fight. Yeah, you can't fight. The ArcLight can't argue with Disney and Star Wars. Why would they just can't?
Well, I mean, Hateful Eight is so long too. I mean, you can't book as many screenings in one day.
No, not at all. That's the other reason why Star Wars has a really good shot at breaking all those records, because some of those other movies were longer.
Well, Star Wars clocks in at, I think it's 130 something. So
exactly.
There's a lot of movie there when you factor in trailers and all that stuff. But it keeps going. It fills that time well, and you can cram it into the schedule. But going back to the question of quality, I think there's also a bigger picture conversation here, which is, now that Star Wars is back in action, I mean, is this going to make it even harder for other kinds of movies to sort of break in? I mean,
it's a cannibal. Christmas is a big cannibalizing situation. And you could argue that they're pulling a lot of movies into the theaters. So if you can't get in to Star Wars, you'll go see Hateful Eight instead.
But what about the bigger picture? I mean, just in this newly refurbished Star Wars world that we now live in, I mean, we talk a lot about sort of that history of the early 70s when Hollywood was having all these duds, and then movies like Easy Rider and The Godfather got made. So then Jaws came along, and then Star Wars came along, and all of a sudden it was back to the blockbuster era. So if Star Wars is back in action and doing well, does that mean that it's, we're just not going to see a lot of risk taking as a result from...
This isn't news. I mean, all the studios are envious of Disney, because Disney has really pioneered this label structure, so that they've got Marvel and they've got Lucasfilm and they've got Pixar. And now Spielberg is leaving Disney, by the way, to go over to back home to Universal, where he's kept his production offices at Amblin all these years.
He can go wherever he wants. Spielberg.
I think it's interesting, because it means that Reliance and Participant and DreamWorks are all falling under this new rubric, and Universal will be the distributor of those pictures now.
So, top 10 list question. Star Wars didn't screen early enough for our list, for the critics' votes in most cases. Would this one have cracked yours if you had the time?
No.
It wouldn't have cracked. No, I don't think so. I would have thought about ways of talking about it, because it's a very satisfying movie on a lot of levels.
I really enjoyed it, and I was on the edge of my seat. I had a great deal of interest and affection, and I, there were lots of places in that movie where you go, whoa, and there's some jaw-dropping twists,
right,
where you go, oh my God.
Yeah. I would almost say it's one of the better directed Hollywood movies I've seen this year, full stop.
And at the same time that the set pieces are very similar to the old movie, so that you don't have this new image of a new thing that he did.
It's aesthetically consistent. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
The dog fights are similar. The chases are, Ridley gets to do a fun chase with her vehicle.
I mean, there are things that I had issue with in terms of kind of the way that people talk sometimes. I think sometimes the screenplay has issues, and sometimes some of the
Well, there's a
newer
lot of awful
things.
expositional stuff that poor Oscar Isaac has to say, like, "Run, you have to run,"
Right.
or "You have to
Well,
hide."
and there's also there's a this cheeky humor element that sometimes works and sometimes felt out of sync with the way that these things you tend to this franchise tends to sound,
But the
which bugged me.
banter between Han Solo and Chewbacca was
I
delightful.
mean,
You know,
yeah, of
that worked for
course.
me.
Yeah, that rhymes with the earlier entries for sure. But there was one list that Star Wars did crack, which was AFI's, because they chose to wait specifically because of this. And you, Anne, have been a part of the AFI list making process in the past, so
Which is
maybe.
why I don't give them as much credence as some other people do. I mean, with all of these group voting, like if you look at SAG, as we were talking about last week, this is definitely an anomalous year, and what we would take as statistically, given no long just doesn't apply this year, and it's just not going to be predictive of the Oscars. And the same is, and the AFI list is a very idiosyncratic group of a combined group of academics, critics, historians like Leonard Maltin, and they all are very different and look at films. And some people from inside the industry, they might have been a little bit leaning toward giving The Big Short, which was an AFI Fest premiere, a berth, or they may have invested in rewarding Star Wars. The year that I did it, one of the years I did it, they didn't vote for The Departed. They fill in each of the slots and they vote and they pick a 10th and a ninth and an eighth and a seventh and a sixth. And sometimes when they get up to the top and there's only one or two slots left, they've left out some stuff.
Well,
And that's when the really heated battles occur. And the year that I did it, they did not vote for the ultimate Oscar winner, which was The Departed.
but what is that process like? Because I mean, I've been on the Gotham nominating committee, and that we choose 5 movies for best film. It's not a list per se, but I mean, it's a conversation, and we choose, and there's a little bit of a voting element. But more generally, it's just there is a real conversation about quality. Did you feel, for example, in the year that The Departed was not chosen, are people really talking about their favorite movies, or does it sound more like a political conversation?
It's a very wide range of people who are all looking at films from a very different perspective. So that some of those people do represent the way Academy members would look at it. Others represent the way critics would look at it. And those are two very different things.
So what is
And
this?
some of them look at it the way academics look at it, which is again very different.
Well,
And so I found that process of communicating across those languages very interesting, but it by no means represents the Academy.
Well, what I find to be kind of intriguing about that is the divide, because it's very Hollywood. It's mostly studio movies, but you have Carol and you have Room, and people aren't picking up on that quite as much. I mean, The Big Short is an interesting entry, and I wonder what it says about that movie having that in
That
there.
movie has the most momentum right now. That's what's going on with that movie. That movie has, if you look at it, it actually scored a SAG ensemble, which Spotlight did, and which it's the only other movie besides Spotlight that has scored so many things. AFI, of all the groups, the one that's the most predictive of the Oscars statistically is the Broadcast Film Critics Association, which is a big group. It's like 200 radio, television, and online critics and reporters. And for some reason, they actually line up really well with the Academy and the Globes. So Big Short was a comedy at the Globes, and it is also the 10 of the BFCA, and so the BFCA has most of the usual movies that we talk about, including Bridge of Spies in Brooklyn, and Carol and Mad Max and The Martian and The Revenant and Room and Sicario, which I don't think is going to repeat, and Spotlight.
But are you suggesting that Big Short could just get a lot of nominations, or that it's a serious contender for, say, Best Picture?
If you look at the stats, The Big Short is a serious contender for Best Picture. Why am I ignoring the stats? First of all, I'm ignoring SAG to a degree because it's just not an anomalous year. But you have to take it into consideration because it means the actors like it. Secondly, it's a comedy. And while the difference, this comedy may be more like something like James Brooks's broadcast news.
Mm-hmm.
It has a little gravitas because of the subject matter.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's a very rough, scruffy-looking movie with not a whole lot of what the Academy would consider production value. So I'm on the fence about The Big Short. I'm not positive that it's in, but it may be.
I mean, I've heard filmmaker Academy members, and you talk to more Academy members out in LA, but I've heard filmmaker Academy members specifically say they didn't really like this movie.
So have I. So have I.
So there's real division on it compared to a lot of other movies that we've been talking about.
That's why I'm not sure, right? Because it doesn't feel like an Academy movie to me.
Yeah.
I like it a lot. I really like The Big Short. I think it's a very smart movie. But I suspect that the people who like it most are the actors and the writers and maybe the editors. Those three groups, as opposed to everyone else.
Right. Well,
So-
I mean, I guess then we just have to wait and see how the next 2 to 3 weeks go in that respect. I mean,
But the one that seems to be losing a little bit of steam and was not on the AFI list is Steve Jobs.
I haven't been hearing much about that at all for a while. I mean,
I know.
Michael Fassbender got some support from critics in our critics poll, which we published this week. But that's
Well,
a totally
Fassbender
different-
and Winslet will be in, and so will Aaron Sorkin. Those three will be in. But it didn't get BFCA or AFI.
What about Room, though?
Or
you come back
SAG.
to Room.
Room is interesting. It's no SAG ensemble, but Brie Larson is for sure.
I mean, that's a little indie that's on that list, even more so than Carol in a lot of ways, right?
I know. The question, I see 5 movies that are sure things for Oscar Best Picture nominations. Spotlight, The Martian, Carol, The Revenant, and Mad Max, for me, are in. And then there's a number of films that are on the bubble. And the bubble would be Bridge of Spies, Brooklyn, Room, The Big Short, and Inside Out, and Steve Jobs.
So Star Wars isn't even a part of this conversation.
No. And then the long shots that won't happen, probably, even though Straight Outta Compton was on the AFI list, it wasn't on the BFCA or the Globes. And then you have
Creed.
Creed, which is only going to be Sylvester Stallone, only.
Amazing.
And then you have Trumbo, where even though it's SAG ensemble, it's no AFI, no BFCA, no Globe drama. It's just actors. I just have to assume that this is a case where we may have to take Bryan Cranston and Helen Mirren seriously.
And Beast of No Nation?
Only SAG ensemble. That's all it got.
So this is just a cluttered year with a lot of division on a lot of different movies.
So no Joy, no Hateful Eight, and no Danish Girl either.
Well, this just brings me back to what I was saying when we had Sasha Stone on last week, which is, in spite of the fact that it makes your job a lot harder, it's actually kind of cool that there's so much confusion about the way it seems to be going with a lot of these movies. I mean, so many different directions could unfold over the next few weeks.
It's fun. No, it's fun for me. Are you kidding? This is much more fun. To actually have to wrinkle my forehead a little bit is a good thing.
Dig in. And then...
By the way, we find out for real what's going on when the guilds come. That's when we'll know. I have to go.
Next week, we'll regroup and talk about holiday movies.
I gotta go do Sylvester Stallone and Tom Hardy today. Am I a lucky person or what?
Tell us all about it soon.